is not adopted. Without objection, a motion to reconsider is laid on the table. The unfinished business is the vote on the motion of the gentleman from Kentucky, Mr. Davis, to suspend the rules and pass H.R. 2883 as amended, on which the yeas and nays are ordered. The clerk will report the title of the bill.
Union Calendar Number 138, H.R. 2883, a bill to amend Part B of Title IV of the Social Security Act to extend the Child and Family Services Program through fiscal year 2016 and for other purposes.
The question is, will the House suspend the rules and pass the bill as amended? Members will record their votes by electronic device. This is a 5-minute vote.
And the last vote of the day in the U.S. House. This after the continuing resolution fails to pass the spending bill, temporary spending bill, which would fund the federal government from October the 1st through November the 18th, failed on a vote of 195 to 230. Jill Jackson, a Capitol Hill producer, tweets that the conservative Republicans are not happy. They say the CR funding level is too high. Democrats don't like offsets that eliminate car efficiency manufacturing programs. Our Capitol Hill producer Annie Tin, tweeting just a short while ago, reports that only 5 Democrats voting in favor of the continuing resolution. So again, that fails on a vote of 195 to 230. This should be the last recorded vote of the day in the House, and pretty near unanimous agreement on a bill that continues family services program under Social Security through 2016. But the vote ahead of this, the continuing resolution, failed on a vote of 195 to 230. This is the bill that would fund the federal government temporarily from October 1st through November the 18th. Some background or some further information on that vote. Capitol Hill producer Jill Jackson tweets that the House fails 195 to 230. House Republican leaders now must decide whether to cut more for GOP or get rid of disaster funding offset for the Dems. Also, Peter Kasperwitz of The Hill writing about the vote this afternoon. He writes that the vote will leave House leaders scrambling to come up with an alternative continuing resolution in order to ensure government funding past September 30th and seem to increase the chances of more congressional work next week when both the House and Senate plan to be off. So again, the CR fails on a vote of 195 to 230.
Is passed, and without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. You guys.
The House will be in order. The chair is prepared to entertain 1 minute. Motion. The House will be in order. Please take your conversations off the floor.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. The Jewish state of Israel is essential to America's national security.
The Jewish state of Israel guards the Mediterranean, the Suez Canal, and helps us with the oil and other activities in the Persian Gulf near Iran. Our relationship is mutually dependent and so extremely important to both countries' vital national security. But what's happening this week at the UN, the Palestinians are going to the UN to avoid negotiating a peace agreement with Israel. The Palestinians want the UN to do what they won't do, negotiate a peace agreement. Yet the Palestinians are made up of Hamas and Fatah. Hamas is a terrorist group with the blood of innocent Americans on their hands. Hamas's charter says they will never recognize Israel's right to exist. Fatah is coming to the UN through their President Abbas, even though President Obama and the Congress have said, go negotiate peace with Israel. Why would the Palestinians do that to the United States' vital national security interests and America's best friend in the region, the Jewish state of Israel? Because they are refusing to make an agreement to live in peace with the Jewish state. The Congress has spoken. We will withdraw aid from the Palestinians, and the Palestinian people will suffer. The Palestinian leadership must withdraw from the UN and go to the negotiating table without preconditions.
The gentleman's time has expired. For what purpose does the gentleman from Illinois rise? Without objection, the gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. It's been more than 9 months since the December 19th brutal and bloody crackdown on the opposition in Belarus. Human rights of ordinary Belarusian citizens continue to be denied. 9 political prisoners still exist. Nikolay Statkevich, Andrei Senikov, Dmitry Us, Dmitry Bondarenko, Dmitry Dashkevich, Edward Lobov, Pavel Severance, Ales Belayeski, and Mikhail Otakovich remain in prison, and President Lukashenko is using them to bargain for economic assistance with the international community. Anatoly Lebedko, leader of the United Civic Party, described the conditions in the KGB pretrial detention facility as being cruel and inhumane, and the authorities' actions against opposition activities as being brutal. For the first time in 17 years, people in Belarus are looking for a real alternative and asking for democratic change. It is now time to invest in democracy in Belarus. The existing window for the opposition might be temporary. People in Belarus need our support, and we have to be with them until the end of this existing brutal regime. And I yield back the balance of my time.
For what purpose does the gentleman from New York rise? Without objection, the gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. As we speak now in my hometown of New York, the United Nations leaders from all over the world are coming in. The major issue is the Palestinians claim they're going to go to the United Nations to have a declared state of their own. I have news for the Palestinian leadership. The only way they can have a state of their own is to sit down face-to-face with Israel in face-to-face negotiations and hammer out an agreement. An agreement which is the two-state solution, an Israeli-Jewish state, and a Palestinian Arab state. The Palestinians cannot try to impose any kind of solution that doesn't work. If two adversaries want to hash out a disagreement to come to an agreement, then they need face-to-face negotiations. This has happened in the past. Each time Israel has accepted it, and the Palestinians have said no. The United Nations should not discredit itself even more and continue to be the usual kangaroo court against Israel. I'm glad that the United States and the President is standing up and saying that we will veto a resolution if it comes before the Security Council. I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Arizona rise?
Address the House for 1 minute.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized.
Madam Speaker, what happens at the United Nations this week will have a profound effect on the profound and lasting effect on the prospects for peace in the Middle East. If the Palestinian Authority succeeds in obtaining UN recognition for a Palestinian state, it will only delay genuine efforts at a negotiated settlement. Israel has for many years cooperated in good faith with Palestinian and international efforts to mediate peace and work toward a two-state solution. It has made many concessions, some of which were not always in Israel's best interests. The Palestinians, unsatisfied with these efforts at the negotiating table, are seeking an end run around Israel in an attempt to gain statehoods by means of the United Nations. Watching this spectacle unfold, I was reminded of the time I spent in Namibia in the late 80s and early 90s, where the UN General Assembly had arbitrarily designated one of the political parties the sole and authentic representative of the Namibian people. That had the effect of delaying the negotiating process that ultimately led to Namibia's independence. The same designation was awarded several decades ago to the PLO, and it had a similar effect. The United Nations, or the U.S. government, should use all the tools at its disposal, fiscal and otherwise, to ensure that that same outcome is avoided.
The gentleman's time has expired. Who seeks recognition? For what purpose does the gentleman from Pennsylvania rise?
To address the House for 1 minute, revise and extend.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise today to commend each American that celebrated Constitution Day, which was last Saturday, September 17th. Over the past few decades, many Americans have expressed disgust with our out-of-control reach of government and erosion of the very freedoms that we claim to protect. The powers of Congress are clearly laid out in Article 1, which is the most expansive article of the Constitution for a reason. Our Founding Fathers fully intended for power to rest with the people in a legislative body. I'm proud to say that during this Congress, the House has taken significant steps to restate its constitutional authority and has given an earnest attempt to returning to a constitutional government. One example is the TRAIN Act on the floor this week, legislation intended to rein in the executive branch's gross regulatory overreach. From the debt limit debate to each spending bill considered on the floor, this process has been about more than just our need for fiscal reform. It's about the timeless principles of freedom, justice, and opportunity that has provided America with 224 years of prosperity and the future promise of our nation if we continue to hold these principles dear. Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I yield back the balance of my time.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Mississippi rise? Without objection, the gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. This morning I had the honor and the privilege to spend 2 hours with 86 World War II veterans from Mississippi. These exceptional men and women inspired generations of Americans, such as me, to serve their country. Sadly, though, when I returned to my office after honoring these American heroes, I saw many of my colleagues from the other side of the aisle congratulating themselves on the ill-conceived, lame-brained, lame-duck session repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell. Despite the questionable reports, surveys, and certifications, which I believe are flawed from the beginning, I have no doubt that we have taken a wrong turn. The 111th Congress obviously failed the American people on so many levels. Repeal of DADT is just another glaring example of their failures. Social experiments like this repeal have no place in our military, and I, for one, apologize to those who have served and those who are currently serving. God help us all. I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from California rise?
Address the House for 1 minute, revise it 10 minutes.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized.
Madam Speaker, several years ago, my wife and I, accompanied by a number of other members and their spouses, were privileged to be in the state of Israel. At the time, the Israeli government made a very difficult decision to turn over the Gaza to the Palestinian Authority. It was a very controversial decision. The question was, would this gesture of goodwill be reciprocated by the other side? And unfortunately, of course, it was not. And as in other gestures by the Israeli government, the response has been, give us more, and we will not commit to the existence of Israel, but you have to commit to the existence of a Palestinian state. Let there be no mistake, it is a bipartisan support on the floor of the House for the State of Israel at this time of great need for them when they face all sorts of problems in the United Nations and elsewhere. Let us be clear, we will not be divided on this. Republicans, Democrats, conservatives, and liberals here in the House of Representatives and the United States Senate support Israel in their effort to remain free and to not be forced into positions that are totally unfair. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Are there any further requests for 1 minute? The Chair lays before the House the following personal request.
Leave of absence requested for Ms. Sutton of Ohio for today after 2 p.m.
Without objection, the request is granted. Under the Speaker's announced policy of January 5, 2011, the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Deutsch, is recognized for 60 minutes as the designee of the Minority Leader.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I appreciate the opportunity to be here following those series of speeches delivered that lead perfectly into the discussion that we're here to have. This is a crucial moment for the State of Israel, for the United States, for the relationship that binds us together. And this is an important moment for those who believe in democracy and for those who believe in peace. Those will be watching, we will all be watching what transpires at the United Nations in the coming days as the Palestinians continue to move forward with an ill-fated attempt to create a state that can only be created by negotiation. I appreciate the opportunity to engage in a discussion with some of my colleagues, and I would like to start by recognizing my neighbor and my friend, the gentle lady from Florida, Congresswoman Washington-Schultz.
Thank you so much. Mr. Deutsch, thank you very much for putting together this important special order hour to give us an opportunity to come together in support of our ally and friend, the State of Israel. I rise today in praise of President Obama's enduring, unequivocal support for our ally Israel and a vision for a peaceful world. This morning at the United Nations, President Obama shared with an international audience his commitment to Israel's security in the midst of a challenging region and complex times. The administration approached this year's UN General Assembly standing strong with our ally in many respects, from once again boycotting the anti-Semitic activities surrounding the Durban Conference to pledging to veto any Palestinian unilateral declaration of independence in the Security Council, to working all summer with our partners and allies against the unending effort to criticize and delegitimize Israel at the UN. President Obama has been a stalwart ally of Israel in this international forum. I'm so pleased that he continued in that vein this morning with his address to the General Assembly. In his historic speech to this global audience, President Obama once again demonstrated his stalwart support for our friend and ally, Israel. Importantly, President Obama used this opportunity at the United Nations to unambiguously state his support for direct bilateral negotiations as the only way to solve the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and create a Palestinian state. As the President said, a genuine peace can only be realized between the Israelis and the Palestinians themselves. There is no shortcut to the end of a conflict that has endured for decades. Peace will not come through statements and resolutions at the United Nations. It is the Israelis and the Palestinians, not us, who must reach agreement on the issues that divide them, on borders and on security, on refugees and Jerusalem. President Obama made it resoundingly clear that unilateral action will never create a state, and that we must continue to support a process between two peoples that recognize both security concerns and national aspirations. And that clarity has not gone unnoticed. Prime Minister Netanyahu, speaking after the President's speech today, said that our President is wearing a badge of honor for his commitment to direct bilateral negotiations as the only way to a Palestinian state. As he has done so many times in the past, President Obama again put forth our country's unshakable commitment to Israel's safety and security as a central tenet to peace. The President reaffirmed our enduring friendship to our ally Israel, noting the very real security concerns of being surrounded by hostile neighbors. He made clear to the world that he understands the very real threats Israelis face in constant rockets and suicide bombs, and children coming of age knowing that throughout the region, other children are taught to hate them. Only when Israel feels its security concerns are met will future generations of Israelis and Palestinians live side by side in pride and in peace. With the international community assembled, President Obama stressed the difficult but vital efforts we must all make in our quest for peace, not only for Israelis and Palestinians, but also across the Middle East and all around the world. He spoke of the accomplishments of revolutions that have brought burgeoning democracy to the Middle East and North Africa over the past year, and the frustrated aspirations of many in the region where democracy is yet to come. In praising the new free Libya and urging the international community to join us in sanctioning Iran and Syria, the President affirmed his commitment to supporting those who wish to cast off tyranny. And in a world free from the terror of Osama bin Laden, President Obama emphasized our continued quest to end the religious, gender, and sexual persecution that prevent all people from achieving their true potential. I am so proud of President Obama's unwavering support for Israel and his overall vision for peace that he laid out at the United Nations this morning. Hopefully, hearing this strong message from the United States, the Palestinians will once again return to the negotiating table with Israel and work out a just and lasting solution between the two parties. In the meantime, we can stand tall with the exemplary efforts by this pro-Israel president as we continue to engage diplomatically over the coming weeks to ensure that bilateral negotiations between Israel and the Palestinians will resume. Thank you, Mr. Deutsch, and I yield back to you. Thank you very much for your unwavering support for our ally.
Thank you very much, and the same to you. I would note the President also spoke today at some length about the need to recognize Israel's security interests. The fact that Israel is a country that is surrounded by enemies, that has faced rocket attacks, barrages, at times on a regular basis, that it is imperative that all of our allies around the world who understand the security threats that Israel faces, that they understand that it is in Israel's interest to take the action necessary to defend herself even as they move toward the negotiations with the Palestinians. That's something that every nation would understand. I appreciate your bringing that up today. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
It is my pleasure and my honor to yield time to the former impressive and wonderful chair and now the impressive and wonderful ranking member of the Foreign Operations Committee of the House Appropriations Committee, Representative Lowy from Westchester.
And I want to thank my good friend, Mr. Deutsch, the irrepressible, strong supporter of the Israel-United States alliance, for organizing this conversation at this very, very critical time. And I thank you very much. Mr. Speaker, I rise in opposition to the Palestinian Authority's counterproductive and dangerous gambit to declare statehood unilaterally through the United Nations. As we all know, a genuine and lasting peace between the Israelis and Palestinians can only be achieved through a negotiated settlement between the parties themselves. A lasting peace cannot be imposed on Israel and the Palestinians by an outside country like the United States or organization like the United Nations. That is why it is so disturbing that the Palestinian Authority has chosen to discontinue direct negotiations with Israel and instead pursue a unilateral declaration of statehood through the United Nations. This action will indisputably set back the prospects of a settlement between the parties and call into question the commitment of Palestinian leaders to genuine and lasting peace. The Palestinian Authority receives more than $500 million in economic and security assistance from the United States each year because it is in our interest and that of Israel to support the ability of the PA to provide security and basic services. But that assistance is predicated on the willingness of the Palestinian Authority to negotiate directly with Israel toward its own state. President Abbas has been warned repeatedly, and I remain firm that this counterproductive action by the PA crosses a line and should lead to a reevaluation of this assistance. Despite the provocative decision of the Palestinian Authority to abandon negotiations and to pursue instead a unilateral declaration of statehood, I remain optimistic that the administration, working in concert with the Quartet, can facilitate the conditions for a resumption of good faith negotiations. And I commend President Obama and Secretary Clinton for standing firm in support of a negotiated settlement and for reaffirming the unbreakable bond between Israel and the United States. I support the administration's tireless work to prevent a unilateral declaration of statehood from coming to a vote before the United Nations and to defeat this gambit if a vote does occur. As President Obama stated today before the United Nations, peace is hard, but we also know that it is very much worth the effort. I encourage President Abbas to make the hard choice to return to negotiations with Israel. It is the only way to achieve the lasting and genuine peace that both Israelis and Palestinians seek. I yield back, and I thank you again.
And I thank you, Congresswoman Lowy. There are few in this body who understand as well as you the importance of weighing the decisions to allocate United States foreign aid and where that money goes. And you have been such a vocal and passionate supporter of aid to Israel to give Israel the ability to defend herself. And you, I think, spoke eloquently about the questions that will be raised if the PA continues to move forward on this gambit at the United Nations, calling into question their commitment to negotiation and ultimately raising the reevaluation of aid to the Palestinians. I thank you very much for sharing that with us.
Well, I thank you, and I know how hard the administration is working. Every minute of the day has been spent trying to ward off what we think will be a real disaster. So as an optimist, I'm hoping that before these speakers get up from whether it is, I think it's on Friday that Abu Mazen is scheduled to speak. I hope that he is wise and thinks through that decision and gets back to the negotiating table. Thank you very much.
Thank you. It is now my honor to yield such time as may be needed to a colleague and friend who has often been described as the great pro-Israel member of the United States House of Representatives, the representative from Nevada, Shelley Berkeley.
I thank you very much for putting this special order together to discuss an issue that is very important and is certainly front and center on the international scene today, as it has been for the last several weeks. And I thank you, Mr. Deutsch, for your extraordinary, steadfast support for the State of Israel and the strong American-Israel relationship that we work on and attempt to foster every day. Mr. Speaker, I rise to support our closest friend and ally, the State of Israel, and to support the peace process between Israel and the Palestinians. We must oppose Abu Mazen's misguided and dangerous effort to bypass negotiations with Israel and go to the UN with a unilateral resolution in order to create a Palestinian state. The ramifications of that are extraordinary. They could destabilize the entire Middle East, put Israel on the defensive at the International Criminal Court, and create a failed terrorist state right next door to the State of Israel, controlled by the Iranians, I might add. The Palestinians have claimed that they're going to the UN because they have no partner to negotiate with. But it is the Palestinians, not the Israelis, who refuse to negotiate. They demand, and they demanded time and again, that Israel cease all settlement growth in the West Bank before they would be willing to sit down and negotiate with peace. For peace and a Palestinian state with the Israelis. But I think it's time that we talk and remember the exact history, and it's not such ancient history either. Even a full settlement freeze is not enough for Abu Mazen. In the summer of 2009, if we could remember back to that time, the Netanyahu government, at great political risk, agreed to freeze all settlement growth for 10 months. Did Abu Mazen and the Palestinians sit down at the negotiating table with the Israelis? There were 10 months of a moratorium, certainly enough time to negotiate a peace agreement that would bring a lasting peace to the Palestinian people and a Jewish state of Israel. Did he do that? No, he did not. He waited over 9 months to begin negotiating with Israel and only sat down at the table with weeks left on the Israeli moratorium. Then what did they do? The Palestinians demanded that the Israelis extend the moratorium. They did nothing for 9 of the 10 months. Then they wanted to expand the moratorium. This is not the behavior of a true negotiating partner. What type of negotiating partner invites Hamas, a terrorist organization, to join them and become part of the Palestinian Authority? Certainly not a peace partner that wishes to bring peace and a Palestinian state to the Middle East. The Israelis, by contrast, have shown their commitment to negotiations and have repeatedly called on the Palestinians to join them at the negotiating table. When Prime Minister Bibi Netanyahu addressed the United States Congress in a joint session on May 24th, he reiterated his willingness to make painful compromises in order to reach peace with the Palestinians. But the Palestinians have turned their backs on the negotiations or any form of compromise and have gone to the notoriously anti-Israel body, the United Nations, where they believe they will receive more sympathy and ultimately success. I appreciate the Obama administration's strong statements that they will veto any Palestinian statehood effort at the Security Council, but I am deeply concerned that the Palestinians will receive overwhelming approval at the General Assembly. Today, the Palestinian Authority has tentatively agreed to merely introduce their resolution for a unilateral declaration of statehood in the Security Council and then ask that no action be taken until they negotiate with the Israelis. This concerns me greatly. What type of way is this to negotiate? Put a gun to Israel's head, and every time the Palestinians don't like the way the negotiations are going, the Palestinians can threaten that they're going back to the United Nations? I don't think this is a true interest in sitting down and negotiating for a Palestinian state. Let me tell you, as I conclude, what I think we can do, and we should do it immediately. Congress must act. We must send a clear signal to the Palestinians that we will not continue to support them with our foreign aid dollars if they choose to act unilaterally and avoid negotiations. I will not continue to throw taxpayer money away at the Palestinians when they are refusing to negotiate in good faith for a Palestinian state. I have introduced H.R. 1592, which would cut off funding to the Palestinian Authority if they unilaterally declare a state outside of negotiations. I hope my colleagues will join me in co-sponsoring this timely legislation. We must send a clear message to the Palestinians that their efforts to circumvent negotiations are unacceptable, and the only way to statehood, the only way, is at the negotiating table. And Mr. Deutsch, I thank you so much for allowing me to share my thoughts with you at this most delicate time in world peace.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Representative Berkeley. You know, if there is going to be peace, you are absolutely right. That is peace that will come through negotiations. And I'm not sure what type of negotiating tactic it is to, on the one hand, say that there is a commitment to negotiate, but at the same time to run to the United Nations to unilaterally declare a state in a way that only seeks to delegitimize your so-called peace partner. Israel is committed to peace. We've seen that time and time again. Prime Minister Netanyahu has sat ready to negotiate. It's time that the PA moves forward with negotiations. I appreciate your insight and your commentary. I would tell you that as you spoke about Hamas, the PA made a decision also to move into a partnership with a terrorist organization that still holds Gilad Shalit captive.
That's exactly right.
And refuses to let the world see him, meet with him. He should be released. This is a message that was given to Hamas, to the PA, directly in a meeting that I was privileged to participate in on a bipartisan trip to Israel some months back. I was pleased to be on that trip with our friend Representative Cardoza, and I am pleased to yield Representative Cardoza as much time as he desires.
Well, thank you, Representative Deutsch. You're not just a friend but a great colleague, and before she leaves the chamber, I just want to associate myself with Congresswoman Berkeley's remarks. The gentlelady from Nevada has been a stalwart for the state of Israel. She is absolutely and unequivocally correct on this issue, and I will gladly co-sponsor your bill. Mr. Deutsch, thank you for putting together this special order this evening. As you all know, the Palestinian Authority has stated that it will submit, or it's intending to submit, to the UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon a resolution requesting recognition of Palestinian statehood. As President Obama said today in his speech before the UN General Assembly, the bonds between the United States and Israel are unbreakable, as our commitment is to the security of Israel. And as I and my colleagues in Congress expressed earlier this year, when there was an overwhelmingly passed House Resolution number 268, the only path to a lasting peace is through direct negotiations between Israel and the Palestinians that leads to a two-state solution. Lasting peace will not come by playing destabilizing and damaging political games at the United Nations. A unilateral approach to Palestinian statehood will surely fail at the United Nations. It will fail, and in failing it will harm the bilateral negotiation process that is the only way to bring about a lasting peace. A lasting peace cannot be achieved while a contingent within the Palestinian government does not recognize Israel's right to exist. A lasting peace cannot be achieved while rockets are being fired into Israel, threatening her children and her people. I was there with Mr. Deutsch just days after an anti-tank rocket was shot into a yellow school bus. I asked every American watching tonight, and those around the world, to think what they would do if the state of Mexico fired on a school bus in El Paso, and the response that we as a country would pursue. A lasting peace cannot be achieved while the same group firing those rockets into Israel is actively trying to define Israel's borders so that those rockets would then strike major populated areas. Finally, Mr. Speaker, a lasting peace cannot be achieved when one party fundamentally refuses to negotiate the terms of peace. I call upon President Abbas to do what's right for both the Palestinian people, the Israeli people, and the world, and to not put political gamesmanship ahead of a lasting peace. I call upon him to return to the negotiation table and to give up this spurious, dangerous, and damaging game.
I thank my friend, Mr. Cardoza, and there are a lot of opportunities that we as members have to participate in the process and to see the impact of the decisions that we make. The opportunity that we had to spend some time in the community that had just been attacked with that rocket fire reminds us of why what we're doing here this evening, what President Obama did at the United Nations earlier today, and what our allies throughout the world hopefully will do in standing up to support the one great democratic nation in the Middle East, why that is so vitally important, and I yield back.
You're absolutely correct, Mr. Deutsch, and those visions of those scared mothers talking to us in their community by the bus stop, a shelter that has to be reinforced with concrete so that they can somewhat protect their children on their way to school, is the reason why we must act for a lasting peace, if no other than that. Thank you so much for organizing today's event.
Thank you for being here, Mr. Cardoza. It is my pleasure and honor to yield as much time as he may choose to utilize to my good friend, Representative Joe Crowley.
I want to thank my dear friend and colleague from Florida for yielding me this time. Madam Speaker, I rise today to speak about one of the most important issues in our world, and that is peace in the Middle East. For far too many years, many parts of the United Nations have been hijacked by states opposed to the ongoing existence of the State of Israel. Some states simply refuse or are not willing to acknowledge that Israel is a country surrounded by many who seek her destruction. They seem to believe that if the Israelis simply conceded, simply gave up, that peace would come to the region. That view doesn't only show a lack of understanding, it is simply wrong. The truth is, no country in the world would ever take action that undermines its ability to defend itself, and neither should the State of Israel. Day in and day out, the people of Israel face the threat of terrorism. From the moment that they wake up in the morning to when they go to sleep at night, Israeli citizens wonder if they or their families will be the target of attacks. Dozens of suicide bombings and attacks have been carried out over the past 10 years, and there is no doubt that each and every day Hamas is planning and preparing for even more attacks. Madam Speaker, we need peace in the Middle East, but these are not the conditions for peace. How can anyone make peace when enemies are seeking their destruction? And now we see this move at the United Nations to secure unilateral declaration of statehood. Instead of finally achieving the peace that is so desperately needed, so desperately wanted, this looks like a step to try to back Israel into a corner. Let me assure you, this is not the path to positive change. It is a grave error by Abu Mazen to demand recognition of statehood at this time. The fact is, the day after any vote, the situation on the ground in the Middle East will not have changed. All the same issues will remain in place. The difference will be that trust will forever be eroded, and for good reason. That's not the only difference, however. There's another issue that I believe we need to have more discussion about. I believe that what the Palestinian Authority is doing calls into question our funding for their work. The United States supported the authority as a way to support peace efforts, but this statehood drive undermines those very efforts. American dollars are meant to support efforts by the Palestinian Authority to secure peace and to diminish violence. But this is not a blank check. We cannot support those who seek confrontation instead of reconciliation. I believe it is time for a very, very serious review of our policy, the United States Congress and the United States policy in its funding, not only for the Palestinian Authority, but for any nation that seeks to undermine the State of Israel within the UN. Not just the Palestinian Authority, but any nation that would vote to undermine the existence of the State of Israel. I want to thank Mr. Deutsch and, again, Mr. Hoyer, all my colleagues, for putting this effort together tonight. I and my colleagues will continue to stand firmly with the people of Israel, and I yield back the balance of my time.
And I thank you, Mr. Crowley. The most important point to make right now, if I can take a moment, in listening to you and listening to Mr. Cardoza and listening to the gentleman from California who spoke earlier from the other side, this is not a partisan issue. This is not a religious issue. This is a question of whether we stand together in support of democratic ideals, in support of the safety and security of our ally. That's what is at stake here, and I thank you for coming to so eloquently and passionately speak to that issue.
I thank you again. Let me just make one point.
Please.
There is partisanship. There are those who would use this opportunity to divide, not here in the United States, not Democrat and Republican, but around the world. This is a world forum we're talking about in the UN. And what I want our allies to know and our friends to know, that we're watching those who would stand with the State of Israel and those who will not.
I thank the gentleman. Efforts to delegitimize the State of Israel at the United Nations must be opposed in every capital in this world. Thank you very much. It is my pleasure to recognize my friend and colleague, a passionate supporter of the State of Israel, who hails from a community in Illinois with an equally passionate zeal for the support of the safety and security of the State of Israel, Representative Schakowsky.
I want to thank you so much, Mr. Deutsch, for organizing tonight's special order. Today, President Barack Obama clearly restated the U.S. commitment to negotiated peace and protection of human rights. In his remarks to the General Assembly of the United Nations, the President emphasized the importance not just of peace, but of human dignity and economic opportunity. In particular, President Obama again demonstrated that he is a true and steadfast friend of Israel and reiterated that, quote, America's commitment to Israel's security is unshakable, and our friendship with Israel is deep and enduring, unquote. Like the President, I am a strong supporter of a two-state solution. I look forward to a future in which a Palestinian state exists in peace alongside the Jewish state of Israel. But as the President emphasized at the UN today, a genuine, true, and lasting peace can only be reached through negotiations between the Israelis and the Palestinians themselves. I strongly support the President's diplomatic leadership and efforts to convince the Palestinians and their international allies to abandon efforts to use the UN to bypass negotiations with Israel. And I join him in urging them to return to the talks with the Israelis. While we acknowledge that the conflict will not be resolved easily and that it will require difficult sacrifices from both parties, it is only through direct peace negotiations between the Israelis and the Palestinians themselves that a lasting solution can be found. There can be no substitute for such negotiations. As the President stated today in New York, quote, peace will not come through statements and resolutions at the United Nations, unquote. In his speech today, the President recognized the legitimate desires of the Palestinian people for a state with recognized borders and opportunities for economic growth. I share his commitment to working toward that goal. But as he also emphasized, any peace agreement must acknowledge and address the ongoing security threats faced daily by Israel and the Israeli people, and be based on a recognition that Israel is the historic homeland of the Jewish people. Instead of appealing to the UN, the parties simply need to return to the table. A lasting peace cannot and will not be imposed by any external party. It must be reached by the Israelis and the Palestinians themselves with regional and international support, including that of the United States of America. The Palestinians should abandon this effort at the United Nations. Our allies should stand with the State of Israel and real peace negotiations. That means the Palestinians have to return to the bargaining table. And so I thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I thank you, Mr. Deutsch. I yield back the balance of my time.
And I thank you, Congresswoman Schakowsky. Your talk about the President's statement today is important. Equally important is what the administration has been doing leading up to that speech today, in the way that the UN ambassador has continued to press our allies, in the way that this administration has been clear throughout that if this movement goes forward, if the Palestinians continue to go to the Security Council, that the United States will veto that resolution because it is not a way to achieve peace. I appreciate your sharing those thoughts and raising those issues with us. It is a great privilege for me now to turn over the floor and yield as much time as my friend will consume, and perhaps we can have a bit of an exchange, to one of the fiercest defenders of the U.S.-Israel relationship, one of the most outspoken members of this body when it comes to standing up for the safety and security of the State of Israel, and someone who has steadfastly remained engaged in this issue, even traveling to New York before coming back to Washington, to speak directly to those who will be making decisions at the United Nations. A good friend and a great colleague, Elliot Engel.
Well, I thank the gentleman from Florida for yielding, and before I talk about these issues, let me first compliment the gentleman from Florida. He hasn't been in Congress very long, but he certainly made his mark very strongly, and particularly on the U.S.-Israel relationship. He has been a stalwart supporter and a very, very articulate a spokesperson for the U.S.-Israel relationship, and I know that Mr. Deutsch has been very, very effective, and it's an honor to do this special order with him this evening. I agree, Madam Speaker, with everything that every one of my colleagues said. And let me first say, because, you know, we are Democrats having this special order, there's been a lot of fighting in Congress, but on one thing we don't fight about, Democrats and Republicans. We agree that the U.S.-Israel relationship must remain strong. And if there's one thing that unites this Congress and unites Democrats and Republicans, it's strong support for the U.S.-Israel relationship. Many of my colleagues have made very, very good points, many of which I want to reiterate. But I think the most important thing to reiterate is this. If there is a dispute anywhere around the world, the only way you can resolve that dispute is getting the two adversaries face-to-face in direct negotiations to hammer out all the issues of disagreement and hopefully come to a peace agreement. That happened in Ireland, in Northern Ireland, a place that we never thought would get peace, but did, because both sides made the commitment that they preferred peace over war and over misery that had gone on for far too long. So they sat down face to face with a little prodding from different countries, including the United States, and were able to hash out an agreement. That, I'm convinced, is the way that the Middle East difficulties will come to fruition, only by face-to-face negotiations. The Palestinians, in my estimation, have attempted to throw so many preconditions at Israel before they will even sit down and negotiate that it's made it impossible for Israel to be able to sit down and talk with them. Boundaries like 67 boundaries or settlements or expansion of neighborhoods, all these are final status issues. These are not issues where one side says to the other side, you have to unilaterally agree with our position before we'll even sit down and negotiate with you. That makes no sense whatsoever. So face-to-face negotiations are the only way that we can have peace. I would argue that going to the United Nations by the Palestinians actually sets back the cause of peace. Because if the United Nations were to declare a Palestinian state, say on the basis of the 1967 lines, which is what the Palestinians want, well, that is a guarantee that there can never be peace with an agreement like that. First of all, if the United Nations were to agree to that, no Palestinian leader in the future could ever accept anything less. And the Israelis can never accept and will never accept a return to the 67 borders, which were indefensible. Israel fought wars because those 1967 borders were not defensible. And so these preconditions and this going to the United Nations actually sets back the cause of peace. Now, I just think a little bit of history is important, because it's so easy to go on college campuses or to try to delegitimize Israel in the United Nations or to have statements that aren't really true. The fact of the matter is that Israel has always been prepared to make painful concessions for peace. I was in this Congress during 2000-2001 when President Clinton helped negotiate what we thought was a peace, the Oslo Accords, and then we thought was a peace between Israel and the Palestinians. I remember in 1993 on the White House lawn with Yasser Arafat and Yitzhak Rabin shaking hands. I remember being there with my 8-month pregnant wife in 95-degree weather, and we all had such high hopes. But what's happened? Abba even used to say the Palestinians never miss an opportunity to miss an opportunity, and there have been many opportunities for peace. In 2000, 2001, Israel agreed to a peace. Arafat, who was the Palestinian leader, said no. And what did Arafat turn down at that time? He turned down a Palestinian state, part of Jerusalem, 97% of the West Bank, billions and billions of dollars of aid. Israel said yes. He said no. I think it's important to put that in perspective. And then the Palestinians talk about the right of return. They want to flood Israel with Palestinian refugees, not refugees that left in 1948 when Israel was founded, but their descendants. And that's a pipe dream, because that could never happen. It would undermine the essence of the Jewish state of Israel. So if there is going to be peace in the Middle East, we need to go back to what the partition of Palestine in 1948, the original resolution, said in the UN. It said Palestine is to be partitioned into an Arab state and a Jewish state. And here we are some 63 years later, and the Palestinians and most of the Arab world won't even recognize Israel as a Jewish state. That's where the problem lies, not with Israel. And the attempt to go to the United Nations and sort of do an end game around Israel will not work. And finally, and then I'd be happy to discuss this further with my colleague from Florida, Mr. Deutsch, let me just say this, and we've heard some rumblings about it with some of our colleagues here. This Congress will not continue to fund the Palestinian Authority. It's not going to be a blank check. If the Palestinian Authority doesn't want peace and doesn't show that it wants peace, we are not going to continue to fund them. I introduced a resolution in the Foreign Affairs Committee which came for the State Department markup, which passed unanimously on a roll call vote, withholding money, ending money to the Palestinian Authority if they come to the United Nations for a vote. Passed unanimously, every Democrat, every Republican. And so this Congress is not going to be a fool. Either the Palestinians want peace or they don't. But they cannot have it both ways. They cannot say they want peace and refuse to sit down and talk to Israel face to face at a negotiating table. So, Mr. Deutsch, I want to thank you for doing this. I think it's very, very important that all people of goodwill, Democrats and Republicans, stand together in support of Israel. I think the President's speech today at the United Nations was a very good speech, where he talked about the bond is unbreakable between the United States and Israel. And we have to make sure that the Palestinians live up to their commitments. Israel is willing to live up to its commitments. Israel wants to live in peace. We're now waiting to see what the Palestinians and the Arab states want to do. And finally, let me say this. There are two factions in the Palestinians. One is Fatah, which is Abbas's faction, and one is Hamas. Hamas controls Gaza. Hamas is a terrorist group. Hamas doesn't recognize Israel's right to exist. Hamas certainly doesn't recognize the right of a Jewish state to exist. How can we expect our ally Israel to sit and negotiate and make peace with an entity that denies its very right to exist, and an entity whose whole reason for being is to destroy the Jewish state? We wouldn't ask that of ourselves. We shouldn't ask that of Israel. And I yield back to Mr. Deutsch, and I'd be happy to do a colloquy with him or anything he might like.
I